All right. Hello. Welcome everybody. This is to the sixth and final Future Hudson event, or sixth and final event in the Future Hudson series. This one on housing. Very happy that you guys were able to make it. I didn't want to say too much other than to say, for those of you that don't know, that Future Hudson has been kind of resident driven and almost 99% all volunteer, really trying to agitate for sort of urban planning in Hudson. And all told, there was a crew of 10 people involved in bringing this together who volunteered their time. Across all the talks, we had 24 individuals with domain expertise donate their Saturday and their expertise to us across those. And for 6 Saturdays here at the library, we've had anywhere from 40 to 50 people like you come and attend. So we take that as a great success, and really grateful for all of it. I think that's it. We're here to talk about housing. I'm going to hand it over. Our moderator for the event is Kamal Johnson. Who I'm sure you all know.
Good evening. My name is Kamal Johnson. I'm a councilman here in the city of Hudson. Housing, especially affordable housing, is extremely important to me as a resident here. This is actually probably the 5th event in the past month and a half that I've been to or been a part of on housing. And I wanted to start out by giving you like a look from a different perspective. Growing up here in Hudson, I remember when I was about probably 12 years old, my family was evicted from their home and we were homeless. So we were staying in a hotel. And during that time, like I really saw the effects of not having affordable housing on the entire family. As a student, I would go to class and I remember there was this one assignment and we had to write our address down. I didn't want to write my address because I was in a hotel and I didn't have an address. So in order to not do that, I got kicked out of class on purpose so I wouldn't have to write that address down. And I think back on how many of our students go through that now, our youth in the city. We have 123 homeless or misplaced youth in our city. And that means that families are staying 2 to 3 families to a household. The rents are incredibly high. And when you don't have that foundation at home, it changes everything because your home is your safety. And, I want to fast forward now to like myself as an adult. And I was in a situation where I got my first apartment in the Hudson Terrace. That's the blue apartments for everybody who doesn't know on Front Street. And during that time, I was happy to have my first apartment and I got a raise at work. I got a promotion. And that promotion took me $200 over the threshold to live in the Hudson Terrace apartment. So I got another eviction notice that said, you have to be out in a certain amount of days because now you make too much money. So I was in the awkward situation where the market for housing was so incredibly high that if I take this raise, it could actually mean it could be something that's bad for me. So I had to decide, make the tough decision is, do I take this raise and take the chance out here in housing where I no longer have that stability and I may be a little more paycheck to paycheck, or do I stay where I'm at and, give up that promotion? Now, I ended up taking the raise and things worked out for me, but I think how many people in our city are in that same situation. So that's why, for me personally, housing and affordable housing is so important in Hudson, and that's why I've been a part of all of these events, and I'm happy to be here today because one of the things I want to do is not just start the dialogue, but start to plan on some of these partners here and how we can effectively integrate them into our city. And that's something that people want to see progress. They don't want to just come and say the issues over and over. So when you hear about housing as an issue, sometimes people want to see numbers and statistics, but it's easier when you can put a face and a story to something. So I welcome you all here. I'll be your moderator, and I hope that we all learn and are able to go forward from here on a plan for Hudson. Thank you.
Ben Schulman, and I am a writer that focuses on urban planning, policy, and architecture. And that's filtered through a few different organizations. I want to talk a little bit today about some of the historical status quo and frame of references that led us into this landscape of inequality and a lack of access. Very quickly, I work with an organization called the Newburgh Packet. It's a nonprofit that catalogs and seeds projects that look at Newburgh and the Hudson Valley cities at large. Our first project was called Reframing Renewal. It looks at the legacy effects of urban renewal in Hudson Valley cities. And I'll talk a little bit about our current initiative, which is called Free and Fair Economy Land Value Taxes in the Future of Newburgh, essentially looking at taxation as a way to minimize inequality. I also work with an organization called Small Change. Now, Small Change is an equity crowdfunding real estate platform, which is a whole lot of words. But really what that means is we're a little bit like Kickstarter for real estate, where people, anyone over the age of 18, regardless of their income or net worth, can invest direct in real estate opportunities and invest directly. Excuse me. Now, I bring all these things up not just to share some of my background, but all of these projects are pushing against the status quo in some fashion. A status quo that I would argue started in the 1930s. Now, if we look at some of the things that were emerging in the 1930s, we start seeing how we got away from communities that look like this, traditional Main Street communities, Warren Street here in Hudson, where you had a mix of residential and commercial uses. Now, before 1934, when FHA and the Homeowners Loan Corporation was started, lenders used to look at typologies like this as mitigating risk. If one use went fallow, then the other could cover the rest. Now, after the formation of FHA and Homeowners Loan Corporation, the narrative about mixed use started to change. Mixing uses was increasingly viewed as risky, right? So this could only lead to death. And I joke, but it's not that funny. Because this is an engineered outcome, right? The miscegenation of uses, like the miscegenation of people, was seen as something to be avoided in the landscape. And this leads to a dictum, right? That form started to follow finance. So really, what did we end up getting? We got sprawl. We got Euclidean zoning. We got all of the things that separate the uses and move us away from traditional communities. Now, that's just viewed through a lens of the built environment. Let's view it briefly through the lens of financialization. Because in 1933, there was also the passage of the Securities Act. This is a really well-intended law. What this law did was prevent people from losing further money through speculation in the stock market at the height of the Great Depression. It did so in one way by separating the market, or the populace, into what are called accredited and unaccredited individuals. Very briefly, the definition: accredited individual is someone who earns $200,000 or more per year. If you're married, $300,000 joint income, or you have a net worth of $1 million minus your primary residence. This is currently 3% of the United States population. So 80 plus years hence, only accredited investors have pretty much been able to invest in private placement offerings. We get to see this emerging picture of inequality in terms of financial access. You couple this with consolidation in the lending industry. You can see here the number of banks declined from 18,000 in 1984 to just above 7,000 in the year 2011. By 2020, it's projected that under 5,000 banks will be in existence in the United States. You couple these things together and you see that the financing institutions to create complete communities has winnowed, as well as the ability to create complete communities. So it leads to landscapes that are not very attuned to locality, that aren't very nuanced, that become prohibitively expensive to build in, to live in, and artificial. You can't really build something that feels affordable, accessible. Now, I want to talk briefly about some of the things that we could unlock in a toolkit to allow communities to thrive and create more on-ramps for equity and agency. Let's talk about land use, right? Every community is a little bit different, but in New York City, where parking requirements are not as stringent as in most places, it's still, on average, 43 new off-street parking spaces for every 100 new housing units that are constructed in New York, right? Donald Shoup is the guru of what parking costs. He wrote a book, basically there's no such thing as free parking. In New York, an underground space costs $35,000. So you impute that value to the construction of any housing development. There's a facility in Dumbo, 712 parking spaces for a 21-story building. Do the math, 712 spaces times 35,000, that's $25 million that could be put towards other uses. You think of the value that you can recapture if you had a parking maximum, meaning capping the amount of parking spaces that are required for a certain development, and you could create more affordable housing. Further, you could decouple the personal costs that people have to spend on transit. The Jobs Act, another tool that we can unlock in this toolkit to create more equitable outcomes and access to opportunity. The Jobs Act is a 2012-era law, stands for the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act. This is what small change operates under. I mentioned this is what allows anyone over the age of 18, regardless of income or net worth, to invest in securities. For real estate purposes, this is now a tool for developers to access financing to create affordable housing projects that is very, very difficult to find through traditional financing. And as we've seen, there's consolidation in that industry. Further, this allows individuals and communities to have a direct stake in the community development process. And finally, land value taxes. Now, this is a little bit of an out-of-the-box thing, but it actually goes back to the 19th century. So a land value tax essentially states that why are we taxing the property? There's nothing inherently scarce or valuable about property. It's simply improvements upon the land. Land, which is inherently scarce, is where the value resides. So by taxing the land itself, you actually incentivize, or you de-incentivize speculation, you incentivize density where it's appropriate, and it is a more equitable way in which to create conditions for a whole community. In short, make land use great again, parking maximums, not minimums, democratize equity investment opportunities, and take a look at land value taxation. If you're interested, we are working on a project right now in Newburgh where we are proposing what a land value tax system for that city would look like. And thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Mattice. I'm the Executive Director of the Hudson Housing Authority. I think most of you here tonight probably know me or have seen me around town. The precursor before I start is I'm not an expert by any means, but in housing, but I've been around a while, and I work in the trenches. So I hear stories like Kamal's all the time because I work with those very people that are struggling and are on limited incomes, and they have challenges, life challenges that they're struggling with, and so I hear those stories every day, and it's important for us to hear those voices and understand what the needs are, and try to structure a housing program around that population of the less fortunate and people that are making lesser incomes than we are, or have a disability, or maybe seniors. So it's important to understand that, and certainly my background is really centered on that. So Just a little bit about my background. I'm in public housing. I've been in public housing for about 5 years. I worked for the city of Troy for 18 years as the director of housing and community development. I've been a planner, assistant planner. I started a not-for-profit corporation in my hometown, which dealt with housing and community development. My background in education is a degree in urban and regional planning, and I have a number of certifications from various federal and state programs that fund affordable housing and public housing improvements. So, you know, we could, it's difficult to talk about housing in 10 minutes because there's a lot to housing, but I'll just focus on public housing because obviously that's what I do. But I really don't think there's enough conversation about housing today. You know, everyone seems to be focused on economic development and bringing businesses into a community, and that seems to be more sexier than talking about housing. You know, housing is typically controversial, but it doesn't grab the headlines like economic development does. But it's extremely important, and I think it's the only element or attribute a community has that will that does sustain a population, and I think that's important. So just to give you a little background on public housing, again, because that's what I do. You know, it's been around for a long time, almost 80 years. Started in 1937, and so a lot of the public housing during that era still exists, believe it or not, and it's old. And that's one of the problems that we'll talk about as we move forward. So it's not a new program. It's been around a while. So what is public housing? It's a federal rental subsidy program. Provides decent, safe, affordable rental housing to eligible low-income families and elderly and persons with disability. And public housing comes in different sizes. It's obviously the public housing we have in Hudson here is a high-rise, but we also have some low-rise units in the back. So it can take on a number of different shapes and sizes, and it does across the country. It's an income-based rental program, typically targets people with incomes below, at or below 30% of the area median income, and for a family of four, that would be around $24,000 a year. Or for a single person, it's about $13,400 a year, which is pretty low, and it's hard to sustain the basic life essentials on an income like that. So the Hudson Housing Authority provides a couple programs here. One is the public housing, which is referred to as the Section 9 program. It's a project-based. The building is owned by the federal government, and the rent is based on income. Typically, residents don't pay any more than 30% of their monthly gross income. And we also administer the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is referred to as the Section 8. It's a tenant-based program. It allows families to live wherever they choose, which is you know, why it was developed. It allowed residents to live outside public housing and become more integrated into the community, which has its benefits. And it's, again, it's a rent-based program based on income. So we're all familiar with Bliss Towers. This is one of the properties I manage. It was established here in 1973. It has about 135 units. And again, it's a mixed population of families, seniors, and handicapped individuals. And again, it's broken up into two properties. We have the high-rise and the low-rise units in the back. So who lives in public housing? A lot of people, about 2.2 million. And they're between low and very low-income families. And of course, they make up elderly and persons with disability. There's approximately 1.1 million public housing units owned and managed by over 3,000 housing authorities in the country. Interestingly enough, a majority of the public housing agencies are very small, very similar to Hudson Housing Authority, that have 250 units or below that. So why is public housing important? You know, it really it provides a critical housing to limited income families, seniors, and of course disabled people. But it also provides other benefits as well. It lowers the healthcare costs, it improves student achievement, and it bolsters economic productivity. You know, interesting story in the community I live in, they've been having trouble with students either being absent from school or tardy from school or you know, missing school for whatever reason. And they did a study and there was a direct correlation with housing and the attendance of children in school. And what was happening is in my hometown, because the rental housing is so bad that it prevented families to really you know, achieve or stabilize long-term housing within the units or within the properties in my hometown. And so what they would have to do is they were constantly moving from house to house, city to city, and county to county, and taking the children in and out of school all the time. And obviously that was affecting the attendance in the schools and affecting the grades for these students. So it's, you know, it's an important part of, you know, housing is an important part of making sure that you know, the students are stable in home, they're eating properly, they're getting good health care, and it provides them an environment where they you know, they can attend school all the time. So why is it affordable housing important? You know, it has the same, you know, the same benefits as public housing. You know, affordable housing promotes diversity. Again, it allows families who are in tight budgets to spend less on housing expenses and more toward health care, education, food, and daycare, which is essential. And it's important to the economic vitality of a community. If they have more disposable income, they're more likely to spend it in the downtown area and in the local businesses. And again, it really promotes good health and physical and mental health. So Ben Carson is the Secretary of HUD. And since Secretary Carson has been in that position, he's essentially declared an affordable and public housing crisis. And why? It's complicated. There's a lot of reasons, but typically what's being pointed out is that the public housing is old. The housing stock is old. Most of the public housing is 45 plus years old. And the federal government is not providing the funding to rehabilitate those units, and they're not building any more public housing units, and that's part of the problem. So what the federal government is doing is they're pushing that burden onto the private sector, and they've come up with various programs to leverage private sector funding for the preservation of affordable and public housing. And it's a complicated program, and it's just been rolled out, I think 2012. The federal government introduced a number of programs to engage the private sector into developing affordable housing and to improve public housing. So it's, you know, I see it as the wild, wild west, because no one really understands what the federal government has rolled out yet. They don't know what the long-term impacts of these programs are going to be, how they're supposed to run. And but you know, we're being introduced. The public sector is being introduced to a private sector model, and it's complicated, and the nuances are, you know, fairly significant. And again, the housing crisis. There's no more public housing being built by the federal government or being funded by the federal government. We're losing 10 to 15,000 public housing units annually. There's a $50 billion, and that's probably a conservative estimate of capital fund repairs that are needed in the public housing. And essentially, for affordable housing, there's only about 35 affordable housing units for every 100 eligible families in the country. So how do we preserve public housing and affordable housing? Well, there has to be political will at the local level. And, you know, the state and federal government, they are probably historically, at a historic state, really putting some funding available to develop and preserve affordable housing and public housing, even more so in New York State. That funding is available, and you know, we need to find ways to leverage that funding through programs that the state and federal government have come up with. And again, especially in New York State, I think the amount of money that's available for affordable housing and public housing, I've never seen it before, the amount of funding that's available. And again, it really boils down to reform that needs to take place at the local level, at the city level. Changing the zoning or revising the zoning, looking at the site plan review process, looking at you know, tax reform, and how we encourage and promote affordable housing in the community. So there's a couple, again, repositioning programs that the federal government has rolled out. One is RAD, it's a rental assistance demonstration program. You may or may not have heard it. The Hudson Housing Authority is actually taking part in that demonstration, and what it's doing is it's allowing the Housing Authority to take ownership of our property, which removes the declaration of trust from the federal government, which allows us to leverage debt to make the necessary improvements that we need for our building. Or there's the LIHTC program, which is an acronym, which means the Low Income Housing Tax Credit, and that's a federal program that allows housing authorities to engage with developers and investors to do large-scale redevelopment projects to preserve public housing and to create affordable housing. And again, we also had a project that we presented to the city a few months ago, and it was under the LIHTC program that we developed that project. So that's it in a nutshell. I probably went longer than I was supposed to, but thank you very much.
Okay, somehow I'm going to try to do this in 10 minutes. Hi everyone, I'm James Lima. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many of you out here on a Saturday. I'm a real estate, economic, and public policy advisor, work on land use planning around the country. I previously worked in government. I was an affordable housing commissioner in New York City for many years, and was appointed by Mayor Bloomberg as the first president of Governor's Island. So I ran a park and got cultural programs going there. So I'm going to talk about housing, but I'm also going to talk about the role that arts and culture plays in equitable development, but also the role that parks can play in creating greater equity in communities. I'm going to build off of what Ben was talking about, and I'm really glad that Tim went before me, because I think there are solutions here. And I'm going to just show some examples of our work from around the country to say that there is a way to do this. The most important thing you can do is have a clear and shared common vision for your future, and you need leadership. Leadership at every level, political leadership, community leadership, but you need a shared vision, which means you need to update your comprehensive plan. It's really outdated. You need to have a vision for your waterfront, for your resiliency. Climate change is a real thing, and you are super vulnerable. You need to upgrade your infrastructure. You need to create opportunities for small businesses to grow. We want to talk about ways that this value and this demand for your place can actually be harnessed and redirected for the things that you say in your comprehensive planning you value most. So we're going to talk in that way about value capture. Kamal, I just want to say thank you for framing this. It was really powerful and a really important way to start the conversation. So I frame this as kind of toward equity. What are the ways that we can move you more toward equitable situations? I'm a little bit of a unicorn as a real estate and economic advisor because we really talk about place. Like, why do we go to the places we go? Why do we settle where we do? Why do we visit where we do? Why do we take people who are visiting us to the things that we like to sort of show off as our pride of place? Because it's the quality of that experience. And what is it about our experience in these places? And how do we think about the economics of that? And again, turn that into a system that works for achieving our values, right? So no matter where we work, it's almost always about these same kinds of systems and processes. And it's about connecting the assets you have to each other, so creating an overall effect that's greater than the sum of the parts, right? So how do we create great streets, great parks, great networks that build loops and systems in a community that strengthen your place? That does everything from create more connectedness across class divide and racial divide and our increasingly stratified communities, which is not just here, it's everywhere. It creates more vibrant communities. So when you change your zoning code, when you update your parking requirements, when you think about the disruptions that are happening technologically and otherwise, you're more prepared to have more mix of uses and to be ready to say yes to the things that you're interested in because it's possible. Really interesting people have a lot of money to invest and creative ideas to invest, but they have a lot of choices too. So how do they make Hudson one of the places that makes the short list of places like, yeah, actually doing business there and implementing my creative idea there actually could work and not be kind of torturous, right? So what are the regulatory hurdles and other barriers to actually being part of these really increasingly interesting hybrid kind of land uses and mixed-use developments? Unlocking real estate value sounds like it could be a dirty word. Let economic growth happen. Let the power of market demand in a place like this, which has an incredibly strong brand and identity, let that happen, but decide where you're willing to let it happen. But do the thing that government in particular is terrible at doing, which is capturing that value. Like, let it happen, but figure out value capture mechanisms. The tax system is an age-old value capture mechanism, but there are assessment districts that you could create, special assessment districts. Business improvement districts are one example of that. Tax increment financing districts are also geographies within which you decide to create an extra assessment if a certain amount of development were going to happen. And then you take the proceeds of the incremental increase in tax revenue and you dedicate it to the things that are your priorities. So you capture it and you redirect your captured value to achieve your goals. In every community it's different. Some place it might be foster care, it might be affordable housing, it might be upgrading transportation infrastructure. It might be a community land trust to create permanent affordable housing, or all of the above. I'm going to talk about some examples of those. For a former New York State psychiatric hospital in Mosaic, working on repurposing old state psychiatric hospital buildings for urban farm, productive agriculture, affordable housing, workforce training, incubators, really creating common places and sort of a civic commons in what had been a fenced off, isolated, segregated thing and turning it into the most civic and public and shared landscape. In Harlem, we insisted that a former cultural corridor back in the 30s and 40s, 116th Street, which had a whole bunch of theaters on it, HPD owned all this land that was urban renewal land that had been cleared and never built on for 40 years. We worked with an African-American Harlem-based developer and created a whole bunch of financial incentives to create the first green affordable housing in Upper Manhattan, the first home ownership affordable housing in Upper Manhattan, to create ground floor uses that were cultural, run by African-American Cultural Arts Group. And there were architectural features that were specifically Afrocentric that just said there was something distinct about the cultural identity of this place historically that we wanted to carry forward, but really make it very contemporary. So the MIST Center, the Cultural Center on 116th Street, I encourage you to go there. It's at the base of an affordable housing multifamily building. So creating and preserving cultural identity is a really important part of the equitable conversation. And you do have those choices as you think about growth here. Resiliency, we've been working with the City of New York on post-Hurricane Sandy resiliency for Lower Manhattan. And we decided that the priority for this project that we called the Big U, 10 miles of flood-affected Lower Manhattan, was a moment to invest massive amounts of public money in resiliency infrastructure. That it was a moment to overlay a new social or civic infrastructure, phenomenally higher cost. In other words, take an action to do the opposite of what the Army Corps of Engineers has historically always done, which is to create a divide, a barrier, a levee, a wall. But instead, to layer on top of a resiliency barrier infrastructure, the most civic, public, common, shared place, the water's edge, as a new great public space. Similarly, in South Bay, in Silicon Valley, locations both for Facebook and for Google, but also some of the poorest communities in East Palo Alto, severely flood vulnerable locations, we came up with a land swap. And again, these could be opportunities here is densify near transit and near sort of mobility choices to minimize individual car ownership. Take the transferable development rights, in this case from the space you see in blue on the lower left, move those air rights over to the place that was more transit-centric so that nobody's losing anything, but basically densify and make more wild and more ecologically sensitive and create a kind of a sponge at the edge to absorb these flood events that are increasingly common on both coasts. The super block in Nyack, it's really about taking what they call the super block, which is their municipal parking lot, and restoring what was culturally important for them, but also has been a real hindrance for the small businesses in Nyack, which also has a wonderful waterfront that's really kind of underperforming. And to think about taking the two most famous people in Nyack and bringing them back to Main Street. So I did a plan for them and said, let's reopen a theater on Main Street on the municipal parking lot, and did a development feasibility study for a cultural anchor there, named for Helen Hayes from Nyack, but also Edward Hopper's from there, except there's no Edward Hopper. So there is an Edward Hopper house, but we said put a gallery on Main Street and work with the Whitney Museum, and they've got 3,000 Hoppers, and if you have a little gallery on Main Street in downtown Nyack that has Hopper exhibits all the time, you've got Helen Hayes and Edward Hopper right on your Main Street, and people are going to keep coming back for more of those. So it's like, what is the identity of a place and what's distinctive about those places? And again, how do you connect these little nodes of economic, social, cultural, ecological vibrancy and activity to each other? So here we propose a big black box theater on the ground floor, and then affordable housing to get more people living downtown and create more vitality more times a day and night. A new initiative with New York City's HPD, the housing agency, is something called co-housing, which is really tiny apartments that share common living rooms and kitchens as a way to create another housing choice at a more attractive price point. So it's kind of like a dormitory for young adults and really people from all ages. And we're working with a company that's done 58 of these throughout Europe. That's a combination of co-housing, dormitory, hotel, co-working space, and then meeting spaces and restaurants and the like. And they're wildly successful throughout Europe. And we've got them interested in the site in downtown Brooklyn. But it's this idea of new housing models that take advantage of what your market demand is and try to redirect some of the value of that to provide the kinds of housing that is financeable but not currently being provided by the private market. And then I worked with the Urban Land Institute on something called the Case for Open Space, and we wrote this report that said developers and property owners have a strong self-interest in spending their own money on building and maintaining publicly accessible open spaces and parks. So if you're working with developers and you need improvements to a great street, to a waterfront park, to another pocket park or square, it's strongly in that developer's interest because we proved that the proximity to great parks and open spaces and great streets is a significant real estate value generator. And so when we did work in downtown Pensacola, which is also, like you, a very historic port city, we proved to the city council that this great street plan that was kind of a whole new ecology and greenway along the Pensacola waterfront, which included a destination new park for the historically African American segregated beach in Pensacola's waterfront that would kind of reclaim that as an important place, particularly for representing the African American culture and identity and history of the place. We said that these great series of new places and open spaces, these loops that will become an important part of the way you navigate through a great downtown, will generate enormous real estate value for the properties that are already there, and they will induce new development that are already there. And that's okay if you capture that value and then redirect it to the things that are most important to you. Again, affordable housing and paying for these parks that are going to be built so that you're not saddled with unfunded parks going forward. And so we identified the parcels that were potentially developable and induced development, and then we went to the city council and presented this and said, particularly here, there are a whole bunch of things that parks do. They create tourism, job creation, talent and business attraction, increased spending. But the two that we focused on, property value premiums and spurring new development, were generating enough tax revenue that all the new parks and open spaces that we were proposing could actually be funded from the incremental extra tax that was going to be collected. And then in Austin, Texas, a historically African-American neighborhood of East Austin, near the UT Austin campus, is a project we're working on with a philanthropist who's purchased a significant amount of this property, and in some ways has parallels here, to do kind of mission-driven and what he calls legacy projects here. So we're starting with artist affordable housing, working with ArtSpace out of Minneapolis, as a first project to say, Austin's a great music town, it's also a place that desperately needs affordable housing. Tech economy is having a tsunami effect on real estate prices. So really focusing on building trust and identity by working with local African-American not-for-profits and service providers to say the first few projects we're going to do are absolutely going to be about creating equity, affordable housing, and dealing with cultural identity. The historically black college and university nearby, Houston-Tillotson, will be partnering with us, and we're considering doing dorms there also. And then in St. Louis, the Choteau Greenway is a 5-mile corridor to link their great park, Forest Park, with the arch on the Mississippi River. And it's a classic case of African-American community to the north, white community to the south, and this is the sort of divide down the center, and how could a greenway and blueway be both a connector and a divide, but also programmed in a way that doesn't just connect east-west, which was our charge, but we said we're going to do this huge north-south thing to create a strong connection from these two completely segregated communities, and that's our big move. Not so much to the river, to Forest Park, but really stitch these communities together and have kind of a shared experience of that central city. And so lastly, just, there's the typical scenario where economy, environment, and equity on the left are often in conflict because you got resource conflict and development conflict and property conflicts. We try to think of it in ways that actually stitch these things together in a more synergistic way so that there are these ecological loops and economic assets and equitable extensions where it's possible that all these things that are seemingly at odds with each other are in fact opportunities to find alignments of interest and commonality through regulation, through finance, through policy decisions. It's really about deciding what you want and who you are and finding the tools. And again, if you have the vision and the leadership, the money will follow. People think that the money is the problem and that your barriers are your lack of money, but I can tell you from our experience that money is not the problem. It's a lack of shared vision, it's a lack of leadership. So those are solvable, and those are things that you, for people who show up at community meetings on Saturday afternoons, can kind of really lead the charge, but it really has to be a broad-based, representative kind of process. So hopefully that stimulates some thinking for the conversation following this. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Dan Kent. I'm the Vice President of Initiatives at Galvin Foundation. Some of you may have heard of us. But first I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who we are and how we work. So Galvin is in some ways a normal foundation. We give out grants to nonprofit organizations. We've donated over $3 million since 2012 to education, social service nonprofits that are serving the needs of vulnerable populations here in the city of Hudson. But what makes us different as a foundation is that most foundations, they have an endowment, and they invest that endowment in stocks and bonds in the market. We have a different kind of endowment at Galvin Foundation. We invest all of our resources here in the city of Hudson. So we invest in things like affordable housing. We invest in spaces like the Galvin Armory, where we're currently standing. We develop commercial spaces on Warren Street to help promote small business. And we also help to create other spaces that really open up the beautiful historic buildings and historic neighborhoods of Hudson to people from every background. So that can include something like Bard Early College Hudson, which is a school space that we developed right on Warren Street, or Warren Street Academy, another school for high-need students down at Front Street in Warren. But today I'm here to talk about our housing initiative. So in 2018, we announced a new initiative that we were very excited about that strives to not only create affordable units for folks of all income levels, but also tries to create those units throughout the entire city of Hudson. So we created 29 mixed income units across 10 buildings. I'll show you a few pictures in a moment. And for those buildings, half of those units were set at rents for low-income families and individuals. So a one-bedroom for $711, a two-bedroom for $933, and a three-bedroom for $1,026. And Tim brought up a great point about the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's a program where someone has a Section 8 voucher, which will help them afford their rent. But the problem is, most housing in Hudson, you can't afford with a Housing Choice Voucher. So how many was it, Tim? How many do you have on the table right now that folks can use?
60.
60 Housing Choice Vouchers that would help a low-income family pay for rent, and they can't find a landlord that's going to accept it. At these rents, we'll take a Housing Choice Voucher, and we gladly take them at many of our buildings throughout the city. So there's a couple of ideas, a couple of needs we've identified, both through conversations with folks here in Hudson, but also in reference to some of the data on housing. And this is part of the foundation of that housing affordability initiative. So the first, and I'm sorry for the small fonts, but it's what's called housing cost burdening. That means a family is housing cost burdened if they spend over 30% of their income on housing. Here in Hudson, over 54% of renters, or 54% are not housing cost burdened. The rest are spending more than 30% of their income. That means people are foregoing things like food, medicine, education expenses, because they need to spend so much of their income on rent. So we want to address this issue, but we also want to address another issue in the city of Hudson, which is economic segregation. So this is a map of the two different census tracts in the city of Hudson. To the north, you see that light blue box. That's north of Warren Street, where we're standing now. In that part of the city of Hudson, the poverty rate is around 30%. South of Warren Street, the poverty rate is under 10%. So there's a huge economic divide in the city of Hudson, and there's a tremendous base of research that all across the country, a child growing up in a lower income neighborhood is likely to earn less throughout their entire life than a child growing up in a higher income neighborhood, even if those kids come from the same economic background and go to the same school district. So at Galvin Foundation, we believe neighborhoods matter, and choice across different neighborhoods matters. Because it's not just about addressing that issue of how much housing costs, but we also want housing that's going to help people realize their dreams and achieve the kind of life that they want to see for themselves. So that's why we launched the Housing Affordability Initiative. We're creating beautiful, small buildings that are rented to people of mixed incomes located primarily in the higher income part of the city of Hudson. So 2931 Fairview Avenue, there's 4 two-bedroom apartments there. That was actually a new construction building. 105 Union Street, this little single-family home down on the 100 block of Union Street. 229 Union. This one, we're just finished putting in the electrical and the plumbing, hoping to finish that by the end of the year. Also on Union Street, south of Warren. And then this beautiful home right here, which is actually a couple of houses over from the home of our trustees at Galvin Foundation. So what are we planning to do for the future? We're here not just to talk about what's been happening in Hudson, but what are we going to do about this crisis that Kamal has been talking about, that pretty much anyone you talk to in the city of Hudson has a story about their challenges with housing affordability. What we want to do is build on the success of that 2018 Housing Affordability Initiative. That created 29 units, but we know we can create a lot more housing like that. If we partner with the community, if we work with folks, and if really the city helps make it happen. So we own multiple vacant lots in the city of Hudson, primarily in that higher income census tract we talked about. And what we'd love to do with those vacant lots is use them to create multi-use buildings. So you've got commercial spaces on the ground floor, apartments above, and we'd like them to be mixed use. So everything from low-income housing to market rate housing, mix in every single one of those buildings. And we'd also like to create condominiums as well, because there are folks who are looking for home ownership opportunities in Hudson who are having a hard time finding any options within their price range. So the idea is we want to create all types of housing in every neighborhood. Not just south of Warren Street, not just north of Warren Street, in every neighborhood in the city that any income level can afford. So let's take a look at some of the lots. There's 451 Warren Street. We own this lot right here, the corner of 5th and Warren. You can stop by on your way out. It's just a couple of blocks over. And we had an architect, River Architects, put together a nice little schematic here for what a multi-use building would look like at that location. Have commercial space on the ground floor, apartments above. It's walkable, right in the city of Hudson. You don't need to own a car to get to work. It's a beautiful place to live, and best of all, it's only 2 blocks from the lovely library here. So, next, let's take a look at 708 State Street. That direction. See, there's a beautiful historic depot right there. Let's take a look at what that site could look like. Keeping the depot, creating a park space in the front of the building, and then a multi-use mixed income building right behind it. Finally, let's take a look at another one, 25 North 5th Street. Again, right in the center of the city of Hudson. This is right across from the Etsy offices. And here's a building we had designed several years back of what could go at that location. Now, I wanted to end with this particular vacant lot because folks have brought up the importance of zoning, city actions, about how a city can promote affordable housing. So this particular lot, you can see it again, it's kind of grassy, sloped hill. This is in the R4 zone in the city of Hudson. In that zone, you're only allowed to cover 30% of the lot with a building. So imagine a third of that. That's what the current zoning allows for in the city of Hudson. Now there was a comprehensive plan passed many years back calling for kind of more urban zoning as opposed to suburban zoning, which is what you see with the 30% requirement. There was a wonderful strategic housing action plan that was adopted by the city of Hudson this year, which calls for changes to the zoning code. So that instead of creating, a little single family home here, we could create 50 units of affordable mixed income housing right in the city of Hudson. What would you rather have in the center of your city? A suburban type home or a proper multi-use building? So there's a lot we can do just by starting with this wonderful strategic housing action plan that's been adopted by the city. If we follow those recommendations, and if partners like Hudson Housing Authority, Galvin, others come together, we can create a tremendous amount of affordable housing, mixed income housing in every corner of the city of Hudson. So thank you, and if you have any questions, I'll put my contact information up here, as well as the contact information for our leasing department. If you know someone who's looking for affordable housing in the city of Hudson, please get in touch with us, and we'll see if we have something that fits your income level. And if you have any ideas on the future of housing in Hudson, if you have any thoughts on the best use for those vacant lots, we love to partner, we love to talk, so please get in touch with me. I've got my number and my email address right on this slide. I would be grateful to hear any of your ideas on what could help meet housing needs and promote more social equity in the city of Hudson. Thank you.
Stand all the way over.
Yes.
I don't have my back here.
So good afternoon. My name is Guy Kemp. I'm Vice President of Community Development at RUPCO. RUPCO is a not-for-profit affordable housing and neighborhood reinvestment agency. We're headquartered in Kingston. We work regionally. And I want to thank you all for making me feel so welcome today. Peter, thanks for putting this together and inviting me. It's kind of an unusual experience to be talking here today. I not only have the man I married in the audience, but I have the man who married us in the audience. I feel like I've got family here, which is really kind of nice. Our question is, can we talk about affordable housing? Can we talk about housing? And we can talk about housing at RUPCO. That's central to everything we do. We also are a Section 8 administrator for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. We manage and administer 2 programs in 2 counties. About 1,800 vouchers in both all of Ulster and all of Greene County. And we've been doing that. It's a core business line for us. The idea of ensuring that there's rental assistance available to folks is an important part of our mission. But the challenge, as we've already heard today, is finding landlords that will accept it and housing that they can afford. It's a real challenge throughout the Hudson Valley, and I know it is here in Hudson as well. We also have a home ownership center. We work with first-time home buyers. In fact, we do about 100 closings every year for first-time home buyers in Ulster County. And these are some examples of folks that are happily now homeowners. Home ownership is not for everyone. How many people in the room are homeowners? Just out of curiosity, a lot of homeowners here. So that's really cool. And you know, there's we think homeownership is a real pathway to financial stability and wealth in not only your family, but it's good for your community, but it's not for everybody. And the truth about housing is one size doesn't fit all. And we ought to really remember that. The need for rental housing is essential, and we need to meet that need at different price points in every community. We also do rehab. We have a rehab office in our agency, and we rehabilitate those homes for first-time home buyers. And we're increasingly becoming more focused on developing a construction arm in our agency to undertake those projects throughout the valley. We are a preservation company, in fact, a rural preservation company. How many of you know what an RPC or a rural preservation company is? Anybody? Okay, so I have 1 person, 2 people. Cool. So
We're one too.
you know something about that. I know you do.
We're also one.
Yeah, that's right. So rural preservation companies have as their core expertise affordable housing, and they were really devised by rural representatives on a federal level from Congress in the United States, who here in New York State were envious of the neighborhood preservation companies and the neighborhood development companies that were able to capture those great HUD programs for Head Start and for housing and for urban development. And so they created in New York State a kind of a unique parallel universe of rural preservation companies with that same core expertise to roll out those programs and those benefits in rural communities and out in the Adirondacks and the Western Tier and up in the Finger Lakes and so forth. They needed that same assistance that we know that urban communities need. Well, RUPCO's a rural preservation company, but obviously we're working in cities. And the cities that we work in through and that we find in the Hudson Valley, they are rural cities, usually under 25,000 in population defines you as a rural city. This is the Stuyvesant Hotel, and it's the first project that we undertook in Kingston. This was it in its, we think that this might have actually been when it opened. It's a structure that was a transient hotel designed by an architect named J.A. Wood, who's listed recognized architect, died in the early 1900s. And when we got it, it was, let's just say it was one of those hotels that you could rent a room by the hour. And today, it is 40 affordable units for seniors and folks with disabilities and special needs. We're real proud of that property, and I kind of wish that the picture showed up better. But we refer to that as the mothership. That's really where we center our offices, and we actually run the Housing Choice Voucher Program and our property management office from this building alongside a restaurant and those 40 units I described. I like to show this off because, you know, community development and creative placemaking takes different forms, and so we acquired this building. We recognized that this blank wall that you see here is what it looked like when we acquired the building, presented an opportunity to do something noble. And the noble thing we did was we identified an architect named Gaia, and he designed this wonderful mural for that wall. What's wonderful about it is that it celebrates the lives of two historic figures that are central and important in Kingston. One of those is John Vanderlyn, an artist, and I know about Thomas Cole, and yes, I know about F.E. Church. Well, okay, so we had this other guy down there. We also had Sojourner Truth. I don't know how many of you know that we have special claim. Historically, Kingston is the courthouse where she, as one of the first black women, I think, in American history, actually went to court to plead for the freedom of her son, who had been a slave, been freed by an act of New York State, and was captured and put back into slavery down south. And she went and pled his case and brought him back here as a free man. That took place in Kingston, and I love telling that story. But what's really special about this mural is that we took these two historic figures who are almost contemporaries, depicted them on the same stature on the side of this building to tell that story and to reinterpret it. And as you know, Kingston was originally part of New Amsterdam, and it was a Dutch city that was laid out by Peter Stuyvesant. And so using this, this Dutch still life kind of approach was a way of also celebrating that part of our heritage. This is another part of Kingston. In Midtown, it's near the train tracks. A lot of communities in the Hudson Valley had textile mills, and this was one of them. This was the United States Lace Curtain Factory. Let's just say it was boarded up for 30 years, and it had pretty much been used as a storage facility. And we recognized that the building itself was intrinsically beautiful and had tremendous capacity to be pressed into new service. And so we wanted to take it and convert it into a community asset rather than blight in Kingston. We listed it on both state and federal registers of historic places, and we turned it into this. It's now 55 units of live work artist space with about 8,000 square feet dedicated to shared galleries and workshops and studio space. It is tremendously successful and an award-winning project. And we identified that there was already a significant investment in arts in our community. Within a block of this building is Bailey Pottery, which is a world-class manufacturer of kilns. And next to them is American-made Monster Studio, which started out as just a studio that made props for the Headless Horseman, but now actually builds props for Broadway and for traveling theatrical shows. And next to them is R&F Paints, which is a world-class manufacturer of encaustic paints. The point was there was a lot of investment already present in arts and culture and the economy of the community. We just wanted to leverage that and create something that would be permanently affordable for artists in the community. So, you know, we talked, and I heard, I think Tim, you mentioned creative placemaking. Was it you? No, it's you. And you know, one of the concerns that I think we hear about around equity, and it's a term that's the G word, gentrification, comes up. And we know that artists are often a leading investment in communities, and then they get priced out and are actually, you know, pretty much evicted from the lofts that they built, and the rent goes up and they're out of there. And so this is actually permanently affordable, and by permanent I mean it's under a 50-year regulatory agreement with the state of New York to preserve its affordability. And it is a tremendous cultural asset. And I like to brag about this aspect of it because it's green. One of the things that I'm really committed to, and I like to remind people that RUPCO is a member of the U.S. Green Building Council. We're a green developer. We care about that. It's how we do business. And that's the roof of the Lace Mill, which has and boasts the largest solar field roof-mounted in the city of Kingston. And the point about that being so important to me is that it reduces the costs of energy for the tenants who otherwise would bear those costs. And I think it's a tremendous benefit to them and to the city that we're using these opportunities of a roofscape to generate some of the energy so that we're not a burden on the energy that's created in the state. And that's Juma playing the new piano I bought them. I went out and I found a concert quality grand piano for the East Gallery. Juma is one of our residents, and he actually played at Woodstock, the Woodstock, and he played with Santana, I believe is who he played with. Kind of cool. And so we have a vibrant program of arts taking place there, and I'm really proud of it. We're also working down in Newburgh. We talked about Newburgh a little earlier, my friend Ben did. This is the historic district in Newburgh, and we created the East End Apartments. We worked with the Land Bank to acquire from their portfolio 15 separate buildings, and they were in the condition that you see depicted here, all of them boarded up, uninhabitable. We created in them 45 affordable apartments, again, using LIHTC, the program that we've heard about already today. And these, this was historic housing stock located in a historic district, so we had to individually list them on both state and federal registers so they would be eligible for historic tax credits. We worked carefully with the State Historic Preservation Office to do that, and I know that the Galvin Foundation certainly appreciates how challenging that can be. We bundled this together in a scattered site project, and it's leased up and been very successful. Again, award-winning project. I'm sorry, I'm ashamed to be bragging so much, but I'm very proud of that project. I guess what I want to say is that Newburgh is a tremendously blighted community that I think Hudson doesn't have the level of distress that I see in Newburgh. I'm careful to acknowledge that there are differences, and all these communities are different. But we've identified another portfolio of properties with them, with the Land Bank, to do. And let's see, I'll get there in a minute. I'm going to talk about Energy Square now, apparently. Okay. So this is another project that we're doing in Kingston, New York. It's called Energy Square. It's net zero for living. This is actually a new build. It was a bowling alley site that we actually knocked down because it hadn't been boarded up for about 5 years and totally underutilized. Really in the center of the city, just off Broadway. And we're creating 57 units. This is a middle income project, meaning that it goes a little higher than we usually do, up to, in this case, up to 80%. But we also go lower in this case, down to about 10% of area median income in some of the units. So by serving a wider set of income bands, we're able actually to achieve affordability to qualify for LIHTC, which is kind of a cool thing. And one of the things that I'd like to point to about this project that's kind of interesting, and I don't know how well you can see it, but we have a sort of a mini High Line in the back of it, which is kind of interesting. We have an elevated park, over parking, so that we have an outdoor amenity that's appropriate for the community, and there can even be some plants growing up there, and it's kind of a cool idea. This is what it looks like today. It's in construction, and this is that mini High Line I'm talking about. That the building itself will have over 800 panels, solar panels on it, both awnings all over the windows. There are over all of the parking fields. There are carports that have some of the solar panels on it. So it will achieve zero net energy using that alongside geothermal. We actually drilled wells to harvest the temperature out of the earth, to carry it into the building, so that it'll be very, very affordable to operate. And kind of a cool project. We're back in Newburgh for Newburgh Progress. So anybody who's ever done a LIHTC project, and maybe any of these historic preservation projects, I like to describe it as brain damage. You suffer a lot of brain damage working with LIHTC programs and low-income housing tax credit programs, and then when you blend them with historic tax credit programs and all the nuances of individual buildings, it can get very, very complicated. And so there's a new degree of difficulty for this new project. We're acquiring another 15 buildings from the land bank that are historic structures. And we're also acquiring 10 properties that are vacant properties so we could do new construction on them. One of the things that we observe in communities are that if you have those vacant lots as you walk down the street, that's that lot at night that you pull your coat a little tighter and you walk a little faster because you're worried that maybe somebody's going to jump out of the darkness. So you want to really fill those. You want to restore those lots that are infill opportunities. So we're going to do new construction there. And what's exciting about that is that it presented the opportunity to really do a demonstration project for Newburgh of how new construction can work in an historic district. And so the city is very excited about that, and so are we. And if that wasn't enough, there was a church, this church. It's the First United Methodist Church on Liberty Street close to the center of our footprint in Newburgh. It's a beautiful building, but let's just say it fell on hard times. The sanctuary that you see here is built for a congregation of 800 people. The congregation numbered 12. So when we talked to the United Methodists about taking this building and bringing it new purpose, they were enthusiastic, and I spent time personally meeting with the congregation, and these were stewards of the building that were so committed to it. They cried, I cried. Everybody knows how emotional I am. It was rough, but I guess what we all agreed to was, you know what? This is the opportunity to church differently in Newburgh. And so our plans for this sanctuary are to remove the pews and to create a smaller sanctuary in a different part of the church. The church has a sidecar schoolhouse attached to it with a little gym, and our plan is to create a daycare and to create workforce development, to create training programs. We're working with the Black Vanilla Foundation there to undertake this project, and it's just so exciting, and there's really new vitality that's just coming from talking to the community about what the possibilities are of what this currently vacant edifice can do. And the truth is that it was originally, an important, vibrant place. It has, you can't see it, it's the opposite direction of the sanctuary. It has a huge pipe organ in it that we also want to restore. So being good stewards to your communities is important. So with that said, I have one other project in Kingston. This is called Landmark Place. This is the historic Kingston Alms House. It was, in fact, the first building that Kingston, the newly formed city of Kingston, built when it was formed. We've now listed this on both state and federal registers of historic places, and we're getting ready to do this and build a new building next to it. You can see how it's nestled and surrounded by a relatively suburban-style neighborhood. We're building this new building you see here next to it, which has been approved by the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service, and that we expect to be in construction on this project in the spring. And with that said, this is my team at RUPCO. I'm really proud of them. And the question that we started with was, can we talk about housing? And to quote my favorite community organizer, yes, we can.
All right, I want to open up the floor for questions. If you have a question for a particular panelist or the panel as a whole. In the back.
Hey, thank you everyone. My name is Catherine. I live in Hudson. I think what's maybe a quick question about the quality of the public housing, and I feel like this could be nestled in a bunch of other things, but just sort of pointedly, driving by a lot of the housing stock, there's like one landlord in particular that I know has like super dilapidated buildings, seem like broken windows in winter time. That building has like since sold, but other ones like, what sort of oversight is there on the quality of buildings? Is that Hudson, is that county, is that federal? Like it seems like there's a lot of buildings that are in pretty bad disrepair and don't meet the safe and the description of what the housing is supposed to be. So I was wondering sort of whose responsibility is that and how does it happen?
I mean, I guess, yeah, so one option for folks is to contact the Fair Housing Office. If a landlord is refusing to make repairs that are causing a life-threatening condition, like broken windows in the wintertime, contact the Fair Housing Office, contact the Code Enforcement Department.
I mean, outside, it seems like they're, you know, just outside of that, like do the sort of organizing bodies take responsibility for it? I mean, I know a lot of people who talk about it's hard to bring things up to landlords. There's threats of evictions. Like it's not as easy as I think making a phone call. Like, and my curiosity is, does whoever's managing Section 8, are they actively looking out to make sure that you don't have deadbeat landlords not taking care of the buildings? Are there any sort of fines or anybody going around and looking at this?
Yeah, I think, well, if we're talking about a property that has a Section 8 tenant, then yes, obviously there are minimum housing standards that have to be kept there, and those should be reported either to the city code enforcement or to our office, our public housing administration office here at Bliss Towers, so we can follow up. But certainly there are fair housing laws. They can also call HUD if there are repeated offenses at these properties. And the residents who have the Section 8 voucher, they're not getting any results or satisfaction from the landlord. They can also call, there's an emergency hotline at the HUD level that they can call. So there's a number of, you can file complaints at a number of levels, either with the city, the Hudson Housing Authority, or the HUD hotline. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat, but I guess so there isn't anybody, there's nobody actively monitoring the housing stock. It's up to somebody in the community to report it to.
I think the city code enforcement is responsible for overseeing the conditions of the properties in the city. So honestly, that would probably be the first step I would take is contacting the city code enforcement officer. They can send someone out and making sure that it's meeting the minimum housing standards of compliance. So if it's substandard, then they would issue a notice to that landlord or that owner to mitigate the problem somehow. So that would be the first, and that would, to me, I think would be the overseeing jurisdiction of all the housing here in the city.
If it's a building that's publicly financed, there are annual inspections from the financing agencies. They'll come to the buildings and make sure they're in decent repair. And yeah, buildings where there's vouchers, there's also regular inspections, and if it doesn't meet the housing quality standards, the subsidy can be taken away.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike Schmidt, I serve on the County Board of Supervisors, which is our legislature. I just want to kind of follow up on your question. I think because of the lack of affordable housing, it puts renters who have a bad rental situation in a really tough position. I certainly have worked with tenants who had a place that was like not up to code, and it had Section 8, and they made a complaint, and so the landlord just decided to like not fix the building, and they were forced to move. And so then if there's not a lot of options, like that was where I talked about, there's like, you can have a Section 8 voucher, but it's very difficult to find a place with that Section 8 voucher. So then if you're in a place that is not up to code and you report it, maybe you can, you have a question about getting your money back, but then where do you go? And so I think until we have, as long as we have a scarcity of housing, it puts the tenants in a very bad situation. So in addition to that, you talked about resources that exist. The county also has a fair housing officer that tenants can call for legal support. But ultimately, we just need more housing stock where there's guaranteed affordable housing. Otherwise, tenants are always going to be at risk of sort of the whims of the landlord.
And
Yeah, I've
that's what
heard
I'm saying,
from
is why,
families.
why is so much responsibility placed on the tenant, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot placed on the landlord or the people who should be kind of monitoring it? Like, why can't the people stay in the housing and just the landlord have to fix it?
And that's, you know what, that's a great question. And, you know, one of the barriers to affordable housing is making sure there are programs for landlords to educate them. I know when I worked for the city of Troy, there were a number of agencies that I funded through the city that provided landlord training, because they should be just as educated and understanding what the housing laws are and maintaining the property and understanding the Section 8 program. So you're absolutely right. I think there has to be programs created that provide those opportunities, not only for the residents that are renting, but for the landlords as well, because they have a critical, they play a critical role here in the community, and they should understand all the aspects of the responsibility of being a landlord who's providing rental property, because there's a lot that goes along with that. And most of the Section 8 residents that we place, and really anyone who goes into a rental housing situation, we all face challenges personally, and as a landlord, we should be able to understand those and how to deal with some of those challenges at different levels. So that's a good point. And again, there should be some programs that are offered. And I don't know, does REPCO, do you provide any programs like that? I know you have a home ownership program. Do you provide landlord training?
Yeah, well, we have, and we do. I'm not, so I'm going to talk about this. It's not actually a program that we'll be bringing to Columbia County at this time, but we're starting a program that's new in the state of New York called the Landlord Ambassador Program, and it brings landlords who have 2 to 20 units, so it's really about small multifamily projects, resources to repair and reinvest in their properties to bring them up to code, to address environmental conditions. Sometimes those properties have mold, asbestos, otherwise poor systems for heat and so forth. You often are in need of new bathrooms and kitchens, and in exchange for that, the landlord accepts that as a loan that is depreciated over time with a 30-year regulatory term to ensure it's affordable, and the property will be inspected by the state going forward. And it's a way of capturing those multifamily projects that are mismanaged or haven't been invested in for very long, to bring them into the formal inventory of affordable housing in communities. One of the things that I think about is that there are some communities that have a requirement that their rental units be registered with the city and that they be inspected annually. And that's a health and safety inspection that makes sure that there's no health and safety problems like missing switch plate covers for shop, the smoke detectors working, and those kinds of inspections. So it's a relatively quick inspection, it's relatively cheap inspection, but it ensures that there's no health and safety violation on a property that is rented in the community. That's an option maybe you want to use to improve the overall housing stock in your community.
And this is also something like, as a community, we could look into. There's a number of elected officials in here, including myself, so we're definitely willing to have all these conversations. Doris, hand over.
Gentrification was mentioned briefly. I think among many people it's taken as an active understanding that gentrification has a largely negative impact on the housing stock in the community. I personally have a nuanced view of that, and I was wondering if anybody else there feels that gentrification can be a positive influence.
I think I spoke to that in a way. I don't think I would say it exactly like that. I think it's important to realize that you can have preservation of community character and quality of life without preventing economic growth. I think it's important to create what I call preemptive strategies. So more and more cities are creating community land trusts, which are owned by a not-for-profit organization that takes ownership of land, and in some cases houses, and creates kind of permanent affordability by developing property and running properties. Basically takes a portion of the land cost out of the housing equation, but also allows them to be kind of stewarded as public resources, as affordable housing. So creating affordable housing, preserving existing affordable housing, transferring at-risk multifamily housing to responsible third-party, not-for-profit housing ownership. That's another one, using acquisition funds that come from various levels of government or foundations. That's something that we've worked on in New York City. I think there are a number of strategies, workforce training, so economic development initiatives to support small businesses. There are a number of proactive initiatives to sort of stem the unintended negative consequences that often come with economic development initiatives, which have a way of creating greater market demand for your place, just like you hoped it would, except now rents are going up for places where you can't control what the private market does. There are ways to deal with it. It's complicated, and you have to be proactive. You have to set an intention to do it. And it's important when you do comprehensive planning to really embed that and make that a policy priority, which means make it a council, annual budget adoption priority. Like that annual budget process, that is your declaration of your values as a community every single year.
I would just piggyback on those comments that gentrification, there's a big distinction between gentrification and economic development. And if we are to view gentrification as displacement, that needs to be the core concern. And I would go back to the conversation about zoning. Gentrification, meaning displacement, is usually indicative of something happening elsewhere, where you can't build in an area that has exclusionary zoning. So if you had the ability to build in a more comprehensive, mixed-use, mixed-income manner, in most places, you would be able to mitigate the equation of gentrification equaling displacement.
I really appreciate it. I agree with it. I take a slightly different view of gentrification, and I want to put this out there and see who yells at me. So I have this thought that we all know, probably in this room, what we mean when we think about the adverse consequences of urban renewal. And that resulted in displacement, loss of community, loss of historic buildings, and so forth. And the way that urban renewal imposed on the community has a similar consequence to gentrification, displacement. And so I like to explain that what I think is that urban renewal is gentrification sponsored by the government, and gentrification is urban renewal sponsored by market forces in the community. And I don't know if everybody agrees with that or not. But once you think about it that way, you're able to kind of recognize the consequence of displacement being a real concern. And there are active things that cities can do to address that. Inclusionary zoning is one of the things that's already been put forward. But I mentioned creative placemaking, and I know Tim did too, I think, or Jim, you did. So I think that we know that there's a powerful transformation that can take place in communities when we harness the arts and culture and it brings galleries and new vitality in the community. Sometimes it's called vibrancy, and we all kind of like that, I think. That's like an upside of that activity. But it is considered, and I think with good reason, an evidence of gentrification. But creative placemaking all by itself is not a bad thing, that's a good thing. That makes people, that's why we want to live in the communities we live in. The problem comes when it's creative place taking. And that's the second generation of gentrification by people who are typically higher income folks who come in and acquire properties in that now attractive community and make it unaffordable, thus displacing those initial artists that came in. The intervention is required at that point, and we got to figure out how to address that displacement before it happens, is what I think.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is just to highlight the importance of promoting educational opportunities and economic opportunities in a city that can involve developing commercial community facility space for daycare centers, can include creating classroom space for schools, creating places like libraries. That's a critical component because displacement is caused by two things. It's that people aren't making enough money to afford their housing, and their housing is becoming too expensive. So we can develop more affordable housing. We can develop rent-regulated housing that's required to be affordable. But on top of that, I think, these market forces exist. Hudson now is a desirable place to live and stay. That's not going to change, and I don't know if there's anything we could do to turn back time, or if we'd even want to turn back time. But what we can do is make sure that everyone who lives here has access to high-quality childcare, high-quality educational opportunities, and that we continue to build more housing that people can afford.
And that the shared places and civic gathering places are for everyone. I think that's not always a given. The places feel welcoming for everyone.
And if I may add just another term or resource that we should keep in mind when having this type of discussion is placemaking should be accompanied, if not supplanted, by this idea of placekeeping. There's a wonderful author, Robert Bedoya, who has written extensively and really introduced this idea of placekeeping, that there is something about placemaking, and he's using a very rhetorical argument, but something about placemaking that imbues a grafting of meaning onto a place, where placekeeping is extracting the value and then articulating what is the asset that is being broadcast. It's a different approach, but I think it's a really useful framework that, I don't think personally that they're oppositional, but placekeeping makes it seem like there are all of these elements of agency that are baked into the placemaking process.
So my name is Maya Reed, I live in Hudson, and this is sort of to Galvin, to Dan, but also it links into what you're saying about shared spaces, is that you have a lot of empty lots. And one of them is actually that beautiful knoll on Columbia and Fourth, which is in my neighborhood. And the idea of building housing and considering then the quality of outdoor life and being able to access outdoors as people who live in buildings with many units, and thinking about communities and who lives in communities, families, children. And the community that I live in, children are grabbing space where they can. So across the street there's a lot, and there are a group of children who use that, have grabbed it for cricket. There was a playground in a school that is now no longer being used as a school that the community and families used, and that playground was taken down. And so now there are families who don't have a place during the course of the day or the evenings to gather as children, as families. And I feel like incorporating always a way to be outdoors that isn't necessarily just owned by that community, but is shared, because as someone who works with children, you want to move around to different places with your children. Or you might want to take a walk to the other side of town and meet up with your friends over there, that they are for the community that lives there, but also shared spaces, places where many things could happen, and thinking about the people who live there and what their needs are. Being able to get outdoors is incredibly important.
Yeah.
So,
I think
and when you own a home, you have a yard, and when you live in a building without a yard, that needs to be considered, I think.
Yeah,
So,
I agree, yeah. I mean, preserving green spaces is critical, and I think the city and the county are embarking on some interesting projects to redesign Promenade Park. I was over there with my girlfriend Zaina earlier today eating breakfast, and the idea to make that handicap accessible, I think, is a wonderful project, and really
But
commend the
immediate
city
to
for
where you
taking
live.
on.
and I say immediate to where you live, where you can walk out your door, and there's an ownership also of that space. It's sort of, I can just be down there and outdoors in this beautiful place and go back to, anyway.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And this is somewhat tangential, but I think it's connected because we're so close to it. So we're looking to partner with a child care provider and develop daycare center space in this building. And when we initially went to the planning board, we were required to produce 12 parking spaces in order to have that daycare center. Well, I don't know if you've looked around at the gardens here on the Armory lot, but there's no room for parking. So they said, okay, well, you need to create parking in those backyards over there. We developed the two houses up the block from here. So they said, tear down those backyards and put a parking lot behind these houses. Thankfully, because of some tremendous leadership in the city, those parking regulations no longer apply. So, as you may guess, we're not going to tear down those lawns.
In the back, Reverend Cross.
Hello, I'm Reverend Cross. I've lived here 70 years. And Tim up there said, it's crisis time. It's past crisis time. We need to be about the business of doing something. I've heard this story before, okay, 3 or 4 times, and we've kept it to ourselves. We need to let it out and be about doing something. Okay, don't take something and put it in your pocket. Okay, let's get together and be about the business of making Hudson what we want it to be. There are people out there that have lived here. Like I said, I've lived here 70 years. My grandmother died at 100 here. We want to keep staying here. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. Somebody needs to tell somebody about that. Okay, I'm not just talking about you up there. I'm talking about you in here and those who are not here. We need to go out and tell somebody that this is an important thing, that we are people, we're Hudsonians. It means something to me. I don't know about y'all, but that's what I got to say.
I want to follow up on what Reverend Cross just said, because the Reverend and I, the Reverend's gracious enough, he comes down and has prayer session in our building twice a week, and we've had that very conversation several times, haven't we, Reverend?
Yes, sir.
And I'm glad you came and spoke and expressed your feelings, because, you know, it plays into the question that Walter asked, and it was kind of a loaded question, but, you know, I didn't answer it, but I'll answer it now because the Reverend spoke up. But is gentrification bad? It is if it's not controlled, and it can be. And I think the Reverend and I have talked about Hudson being at a crossroads. And if we don't, if the city doesn't define what it wants to be, then we'll lose an opportunity to entrench the diverse housing that we need here. And, you know, a perfect example of gentrification, but it was a gentrification that I think was supported by an entire community, was Saratoga. And that was a plan. I did my internship there out of college when I graduated from planning. And that was an entire community that wanted that gentrification to occur. And so, you know, Saratoga is a byproduct of that. Is it a great place to be? I don't know. It's kind of a mirage, if you ask me. It looks great from a distance, but when you go there, there's no diversity. There's no affordable housing. You know, there's very little public housing, and it doesn't have an atmosphere that Hudson has now. It doesn't have that diversity. It doesn't have that mystique about it. It doesn't have, you know, when you go to Manhattan, it's an exciting, diverse community. Hudson has that going on now, but it's at risk of losing that, much like Saratoga has lost that. So I think we have to think about, you know, what Hudson wants to be before it's too late. Because if we let gentrification occur beyond the tipping point, there will be no turning back. It's the most important time right now, and the Reverend is expressing his fears because he knows. He's lived here all his life, and he knows and he sees the outcome because there's no action being taken, that he's going to have to leave his community. He knows that. He expresses that fear to me every time we sit down and talk. And we talk about you know, how we need to preserve and entrench the housing that will provide homes for the folks that have lived here, were born and raised here, to stay here. And so that needs to be a topic, and we need to have that conversation. And it probably, you know, won't be a pleasant conversation, and it'll probably be controversial, but it's a conversation that needs to happen nonetheless. And, you know, we have folks like Galvin and the Housing Authority here that are willing to lead and create a vision for that. You know, we would hope to have support for that. So that's my thought. And Reverend, thank you for being here and saying that.
I believe our tax system needs to be looked at. Property taxes have been applied by neighborhood and without much thought of how that will affect low-income people and people being able to rent at a given price, because if the landlord is paying a huge real estate tax, they've got to recoup that. And they also want to make a profit like any business. And people who are renting small spaces as retail see their rent go up because of real estate tax. Now, you are deciding as a city, the administration that is, that this is going to happen. Maybe thoughtlessly, maybe deliberate. Maybe you would prefer everybody be rich. Maybe you would prefer that every store be part of a chain. I don't know. But that is what the goal seems to be and will be. If you're recklessly concerned about money grabs and don't think about people and the ability to have small businesses, you know, you've got to take these things seriously. Money is not a plaything. It affects people, and it can be positive and it can be really bad. And you know, it's got to be thought about in a realistic way, how it's affecting what you claim you want to keep, diversity. The antique stores are leaving. They can't afford the rents. You know, they're not a turnover, you know, fast food place. They just aren't. And do you really don't want that kind of business here? I mean, you know, it's an attraction. People used to come here, just go to the antique stores, and then they would do other things and just be killed. So you know, a lot of this is action taken consciously to increase money for the city. But what are they doing with it? They're destroying the city.
I guess I'll phrase this question to you, because I know you guys are in a similar situation like Hudson, where property taxes have been raised tremendously, and there's a lot of people that can't afford to live. So how have, I guess, your program been beneficial to people who are already property owners and want to remain in their homes?
Okay, sure. So well, one of the challenges that we see in the cities we work in, it has to do with the single-family homes that are, frankly, substandard and uninhabitable and require reinvestment, and assisting them, the property owner, in addressing the deficiencies and whether that's structural or systemic in the building is part of what we do. But you know, that can be an important approach, particularly on main streets. There are a lot of buildings I can think of that we've worked with where the residential units on the upper floors were abandoned basically and turned into storage or other uses that we've been working to refurbish to bring back into a residential use. And the goal there, of course, is that if they are put to a residential use, they change the pro forma for the building, and they make it more affordable to the owner of that property. And we do that always with a regulatory term and a requirement that they be affordable to the tenants. But the truth is that the tax considerations that I've heard raised are not unique to Hudson. They're pervasive in every river town, and they're more extreme in some places than others. Newburgh, as an example, has something like 600 to 800, and I'm told that number is understated, of properties that are abandoned and off the tax rolls that are not contributing. As a consequence, the taxpayers that remain need to pick up that tax burden to keep the community operating. And it's a real challenge. And you know, there's no, you on the one hand, you can't build your way out of that. It's going to take a lot of work to attract the reinvestment in the community, to build the tax base. And it's not just obviously in the housing realm, it's in the commercial realm and in the job creation and economic development that the community requires to build a sustainable tax structure that keeps the city operating. And it's not just the city, it's the county, the schools, and everybody else. I don't know about you, but where I live, you know, my school tax burden is higher than my other tax burdens combined in terms of my property taxes. So it's going to take some work. I think that there are a couple of things that I've heard of working in other communities that might be helpful here. One of the things you want to do is you want to sustain homeowners and the folks who actually live in the city. So I don't know if you have a homestead tax abatement, and that's one approach that I know some communities use to alleviate the burden, at least on the folks who reside in the city. Let's see.
Explain what that is.
Yeah. So in other words, it's a different tax rate for the people who actually live in an owner-occupied unit, and it provides an abatement for them by comparison to those who are renting that out to others. And so it takes some of the burden off of, and what it does is it actually incentivizes or encourages something that people kind of like, which is owner-occupied buildings in their community. Tends to have a stabilizing effect on the community. People tend to take better care of the properties that they live in when they own them, and that's an option to consider. But there, you know, that requires pretty significant analysis to figure out exactly what it is you want to do to address the tax burden. I heard the gentleman refer to antique shops and commercial, and you know, there are definitely some communities that have come up with strategies to alleviate the tax burden on targeted industries or targeted commercial enterprises. There's no one-size-fits-all on this, but maybe that's something to explore. Thinking about equity and displacement for a second, one of the things that I know some communities are exploring is making sure that in particular businesses that are owned by minority entrepreneurs who are really in danger of being displaced if their rents go up, coming up with strategies to sustain them in business and to assist them in business planning and other benefits that keep them operating. I don't know if that helps.
Also, we work in places all over the country that are strong economies and have seen a lot of change. So a lot of change has already happened. So what can you do? The one thing to look at, and again, I have no history here and I have no baggage here, so I'll probably step on a landmine by saying this, but you have an Amtrak station on a riverfront. And you have what I would consider if I put my real estate hat on, you have an underperforming waterfront. Like, you have an enormous asset there. Some of it is quasi-publicly owned or publicly owned. So what if you decided as a community, like, yeah, we don't really like change. But you know what? There are so many good examples around the world of low-scale, high-density, super high-quality designed places that are additive to the public experience of a riverfront, of a historic community like this, where if you control it and you decide how the ground leases for that property get directed or land sales get directed, you can fund a lot of affordable housing. You can work with faith-based organizations and not-for-profits to create purpose-built supportive housing and create affordable artist work, presentation, maker spaces that, you know, kind of broadcast your values and who you want to be and have been. So it's complicated, it's hard, and people don't like change, especially if it's development. But you have an Amtrak station on the Hudson River with a lot of land there, and it strikes me as a complicated but worthwhile effort to do a comprehensive plan update and a planning process that has all the voices heard and says, what if there was something at stake here? You know, like a generational opportunity right now to capture that value, which you've already said exists, right? Because you're becoming an increasingly fancy second home community of choice. I ran into a developer client of mine who's here for a wedding at Basilica, and they're spending a long weekend here and spending a lot of money. So how do you capture that demand and that unique mobility and access to the greatest job center in the United States, 2 hours away, and this incredible, majestic Hudson River location, to secure like a structural source of revenue for the things that you want that the market's not doing? Affordable space for living, for working, for the arts, for cultural identity that's distinctly Hudson. I don't know what those things are. I just think there's a process that's a public-private partnership that is possible.
I also want to speak to your comment. Thank you for that statement. But we're also looking into a lot of tax breaks for citizens. We understand the issue with the assessments and property taxes, so we're looking into a number of resolutions to basically help out individuals. If it's nothing that we can help citywide right away, we're looking to help as many individual property owners as we can. So we've been in constant talks with the congressman. I've been in a little talks with the Senate, so we're definitely working on issues that we want to keep our residents here. We want Hudson to progress without losing like its soul and its people. So that's something that's extremely important to us. But I didn't want to make this like a political event, so I will keep my comments a little low. But I know you had a follow-up.
Well, I would like to point out that our train station is very important, and it's the third busiest Amtrak station in New York State.
Yeah.
So we're not competing there. We can't beat the Pennsylvania station for maybe 1 things that is a very important part of our community. And also, I think, cities, as with other institutions or businesses, whatever, should first look at living within their means and take care of what is really needed done first, and then look out for speculation on ways to increase revenues. But, we could have more concern about our water, other things like that.
Hi, my name is Mark Morgan Paris, and I guess my question is, well, it's for everybody, but maybe more for James. You mentioned that, I think it was you said shared vision, leadership, and political will were kind of key for making these things that the community wants happen, and for getting economic benefits. In the places that you've worked, where this has happened, how has that happened? How has that shared vision and political will come together? Because in Hudson, there have been, over the years, lots of different studies that get done and that people like, and then, to Reverend Cross's point, there's not doing. So how, in your experience, how does the doing happen?
Well, I think this forum, Peter has promoted, is a great piece of that, because it's creating a civil conversation among people with different views, presumably, about the future of your place. So I think you need, I think community engagement and public engagement and raising all of our sort of civic IQ about the possibilities and the options and the compromises that are necessary to both allow for social, environmental, cultural identity and preservation and conservation and sustainable growth with that. I think those are complex things that require a lot of discussion. But I think none of this change is going to happen unless you have really broadly representative and really inclusive public conversation about what's possible. And it's got to happen with leadership driving it, whoever that is. It could be a public official, or it could be somebody at a foundation, it could be a civic organization, it could be the business community. Somebody needs to lead a process and spend an inordinate amount of time building trust. And I think that's the key. Like, if everybody really feels seen and heard, and the process is transparent, then you can get to a pretty good place. But you have to dedicate the time and do a lot more of this for a lot more people, and frankly, a much more diverse room of people, because you do have a pretty diverse community. So you have to go to where the people are and figure out how do we get to them now? Saturday afternoon in a public library in a particular neighborhood, that's a pretty good start. But people have busy lives, so you have to figure out how do you get to them. We've done events where we want to talk to teenagers of color. So we did a pizza party in the library in Brooklyn. And, you have food, free food. It gets people to come to meetings. I would say that the engagement's important, but then you've got to have some capacity. You've got to have people who maybe have got some experience doing it and can kind of manage a process, and then just stay flexible. But I think you've got political leadership that's engaged and is thinking about what's at stake.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I think it comes through partnership. I mean, you brought up capacity, and you look at organizations like RUPCO and the incredible work they're doing in Newburgh and Kingston, and that happens when organizations like RUPCO with capacity, organizations like Galvin, we can bring some resources to bear, when they can get together at the table with elected officials and sit down and say, okay, you have the pulse of the community. Someone like Kamal is connected to those community voices, and as a collective group we can partner and produce those solutions that are responsive and that draw from the expertise and the resources of organizations like RUPCO.
So much of it is the design of the conversation, and there are ways in which you can play with the actual proxemics of place to make people feel more included. I think this is a great example of it, but even playing with how your chairs are situated, doing things like fishbowl meetings where you have an inner circle of people that there's a moderator who tees up a question, and then there's an outer circle. And at any point in time in the conversation, someone from that outer circle can tap an individual on the shoulder who's in the inner circle and replace them. So if you put public officials in that mix, it automatically levels the conversation and eliminates some of that inherent power dynamic that people get intimidated by. And as James is saying, if there's a way to synthesize that and turn it into something that the community as a whole is speaking with, then you have a comprehensive, inclusively engaged plan to work off of. There's so many, when you play with the idea of place, everyone has different vocabularies, but we're all searching for the same type of language to articulate what our sense of place is. And I think, even though it can seem like the public process is broken, to James's point, it just takes more engagement.
Also, social media is this false sense that we're getting more connected and we're getting much more isolated. So these civic places and public places of gathering need to be for everybody. It's really important to think about what those are, and so workshops of, getting out the X-Acto knives and pens and get everybody just working around the table, moving pieces around. What does this place look like in the future?
I think, honestly, until you memorialize what it is you want, your vision, writing a statement down so everyone knows what it is the community wants to be, and that's what you follow. Whether it's a vision statement or a mission statement, you have to write it down. And it has to be a collective vision that that the community, the political leaders, they cycle in and out every 2 years. We have an election process, and it makes it difficult. And I think that's why it's so much more important in those conditions to be able to memorialize what it is the community wants for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And that becomes the vision for the community. But until you write it down, no one knows what that is. And I think that's what we have. We have we have a number of different studies, but nothing has tied those all together into a vision, a single vision that everyone supports in that big group.
I guess the response I might add to that, is that I've often found that statements like that tend to be the same. We want a vibrant, diverse community in which people of all ages and creeds and income levels can participate together in sharing the resources at affordable level. So if you take a statement like that just ends up being generic, how do you turn something like that, a vision like that, into specific, actionable things that can be done and implemented with amounts of money earmarked for them?
I just want to say that this community had was a winner of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, and went through some strategic planning around that, certainly to prepare the application and submit it, and then went through the process of developing a strategic investment plan that went to the state. And I'm really curious about, because I was part of that initiative in Kingston. I feel like there's a disconnect maybe. I wonder how you all feel about that plan, and I'm wondering if anybody wants to speak to that. And I've taken everybody's breath away, I see.
Well, one thing I'd like to quickly chime in, as part of that process, a housing task force was formed, and Mark, who's asking the question, was a very active member of that task force, which created a strategic housing action plan. And, I was a part of that task force too, and it's great to have plans, but I think folks want to see action. They want to see the plans followed.
So you
Right.
created an action plan then?
Yeah, and it has some really excellent recommendations.
So
Some
now
of
we
the
need an
changes we've all
implementation
been
plan
talking
about how to step through actually
Indeed.
taking those concrete steps.
Absolutely.
Understood.
Or to share that plan back to the community,
Yeah.
because we don't know necessarily what that plan is.
Thank you. Can I get a little louder? Please.
Can I make one very obvious statement? I did actually read the Strategic Housing Action Plan, and my takeaway, the most powerful sentence in it was, Hudson doesn't have a housing crisis, it has a jobs crisis. That's what it said, right?
You know,
Okay.
maybe the DRI is the DRI is economic development related. The Housing Action Plan outlined very concrete recommendations the city can follow, like removing parking requirements for buildings, providing different zoning for affordable housing developments. We included commitments on our own, like the 2018 Housing Affordability Initiative of the units that we were going to develop as part of that plan. So there's some real actionable steps that we can all take, but I think Guy is exactly right. It's only as good as the implementation plan.
I guess I gotta say this because I really appreciate that moment in the conversation where this is a housing conversation, and I noticed this happens in a lot of meetings that I go to that are kind of like this, where I want to talk about housing, and then somebody else wants to talk about their tax burden, and then I talk to the tax burden. Somebody else wants to talk about job creation, and I talk about job creation and economic development, and somebody else wants to talk about recreation and transportation, and I talk about recreation and transportation. And the point of the story here is that housing tends to start the conversation about all of the issues that are present in your community, and frankly, they match the same issues that are present in every community. And I'm not minimizing them, I'm just saying that, you know, the thing about having a housing plan is that you got to work on that. If you're going to work on that. That doesn't mean that you can't do all those other things too, and you're going to have to. And for God's sake, never ever talk about race or class or any of the other issues that are present in your community, because you'll just get on that treadmill and never get off. And so it does seem to me that one of the things that you've already done is you focused on creating a housing plan, and the implementation component is a whole other set of work in front of you. And likewise, that may be true for a whole bunch of other plans that have taken, and this community can't be that different from others, where there are lots and lots of plans that have been written over the years, and they sit in nice binders on the shelf and don't go through that implementation phase. And you need to find, you know, when you get into this conversation, you got to stay committed to the outcome that you were working towards. I hope that helps.
I just want to speak to Mark's comment, because it seems to me he's unaware of how much we have implemented things already. We did get rid of the parking requirement. And as Ben pointed out, that's number one. Zoning changes are in the works as we speak. Number two. So we're doing it. I mean, implementation is there. It's just a question of how slow it takes, getting community input and support, and that takes time. But we're doing it, I think.
You saved those lawns already with those parking changes, so yeah, Tom's absolutely right.
By the way, it was Galvin's decision to try to take down those trees, not ours.
Well, it was...
But that was their solution to the problem, I
Yeah.
say.
Nick, you have a question on that?
I would just like I think that some concrete action that I hear coming out of this sounds great, and I would like to really challenge the next Common Council. I think this homestead, what was it called, homestead tax? Or homestead tax break, whatever it is. That sounds great. Let's look into that. I think the legislation on short-term rentals, not owner occupied, let's move that forward. That's such a huge detriment to this town. The zoning, inclusionary zoning, anything else we can do zoning to improve this, let's make all that stuff happen. Because yeah, the crisis thing, again, I said it in the last meeting that we had here, so I don't want to go over the same stuff again. But I worry that, I'll be a little bit of a cynic. I worry that we sit here in these meetings and talk about how good of a job everybody's doing, and about how gentrification is not actually that bad and economic development, blah, blah, blah. And it takes away from the real crisis of the people who are sleeping in cars, people who are sleeping on couches, families that are being broken apart. It's happening weekly here. We can all talk from our privilege, or most of our privilege in this room, about the economic benefits or anything else, but people are experiencing real hardships. And we, as the people who are involved and can affect legislation, we need to do it, and we need to do it really quickly, because it's an emergency right now.
I have an idea, which was actually, I forgot your name. Tim. Is that maybe something visual where you, and also what you were talking about is the way old cities were set up, is that do we have a place for young people to go and have fun? Like, and is there a place for, is there a roller skating rink? Is there a bowling alley? Things that communities used to have, and that we could have a chart and we could say, okay, this is where the kids are going to go, and when that's accomplished, everybody can be like, okay, we got that, So I'm just thinking that it seems like there's kind of a black hole of government, and people don't really know what's going on. But if you had something visual where you could say, everybody agrees that, I remember someone told me that the Savoy, I read it, I saw it in a film about saving the city from the cement factory that was going to come in. It was like that was a big part of the city. It is now turned into, it's going to be a high-end hotel and restaurant, but that was an important part of the city. And I think there's no reason, maybe it doesn't have to be on Warren Street, but there should be a similar kind of club on State Street maybe, And so I just think that if you could do something visual, everybody can get together and say, yeah, that's a great idea, we want that. And it's not rocket science. People know what makes it fun to live in a city. And I think, and then it'd be a visual thing, maybe even at the library, it's like, okay, we got the bowling alley, and it's like we're moving forward. So that's my thought.
Yeah, very good point. Yep, exactly.
One more question. Run low one time. Anybody have anything pressing? All right.
I appreciate all you guys coming up. It was a wonderful presentation. I just think, with all these networking in the room, if we can get together and just somehow actually just care about the people and the development of, the low-income families and, people, Reverend Cross, that's my father. I'm Malachi Walker, by the way. It's real. He spotted gentrification probably about 20 years ago, coming into Hudson. I mean, it's a real development. It's something that's happening. And I appreciate all you guys and, just your ideas and, the planning and everything that we hear. It sounds beautiful, but, when it comes down to it, we really have to care about the people in Hudson because, we're vanishing. We're almost, obsolete. It seems like people that's been here for years, they're moving away. They can't afford to be here, and it's almost like a crime, a legal crime that's happening in Hudson. We see it. We all see it. We're not blind. I'm running for office. I'm just throwing it out there, and not because I'm a political, war hog. I really, when it comes to politics, and I'm really not a political person, but I love my community. I love the people. I'm here to serve, and I'm just here to do whatever it takes to take that next level. And like I said, I appreciate you guys, but some real action need to happen here. It's real. This is real. This is our reality. We got kids that, like Kamal was talking about earlier with his experience. These kids, they're getting in trouble, but it's not for the reason that they're actually getting disciplined for. It's for other reasons. They can't be in their apartments because the eviction notice was on their door, so they're acting up in class. They're doing different things that, just to soothe their situation. you know, something need to happen here. It's, you know, I'm, you know, hate seem like I'm getting emotional here, but you know what? It's real to me. You know, it's in my backyard and it's personal. You know, so I love the meeting, but let's do something for real. Let's, you know, you guys all sound intelligent, sound, you know, like you know what you're talking about, but let's really be here for the people, for the community of Hudson. Thank you, that's all.
I just want to follow up on that comment, because I have to tell you, you know, the Housing Authority did take action. We had a plan before the city, and we had a plan before the planning board of building affordable housing in the city of Hudson, right? We were committed to addressing the problem. We took action. Within a year of me being here, we had a developer and a plan in front of the planning board for 75 units of additional affordable housing and a plan to redevelop Bliss Towers to entrench and preserve that housing for the next 30, 40 years, right? It didn't work out for whatever reason. The community wasn't ready for it. But if anything, it started a dialogue and a discussion. And even though we weren't successful, I think we're here today because of that proposal, and it started a dialogue between the city leaders and the community. We have Reverend Cross and his son. Those are powerful stories, and Kamal's story. Those are powerful stories, and those are the stories I hear every single day. And that's why we presented that proposal in front of the planning board and for the city, for that very reason. We need to go down that road again, right? And we need greater support. And I'm reaching out to the Reverend. He knows that we need support from the religious groups in this community and the residents in the neighborhood to come together and support these projects that the planning board is committed to, because we are committed to building affordable housing and preserving the public housing in this city so everyone can live here as long as they want. But that's a great...
So this is a wonderful opportunity, as I happen to be on the planning board, to ask you, do you feel that the planning board played a substantial role in the failure of the project to go forward?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. None whatsoever. I just made a point that we had a project, and it was at the point where we were ready to present it to the city. But no, I believe the planning board, in its initial review, did what they were supposed to do within the framework of their capacity there. And I believe the planning board would have approved it because it was a great project. It was a great project, but it was nitpicked to death by the very folks that wouldn't even be, that wouldn't even live there or would impact. And that was the biggest, you know, frustration for us, because who wouldn't have wanted a $50 million redevelopment project that would preserve housing for those folks that wanted to live here and not be worried about being pushed out. That I still scratch my head over that. But
just my version of this, Tim, is that it was a great project in many ways. But I think the lesson of that project was it was done top down. It didn't have the community input from the beginning to bring the project forward. It was like, here it is. This is what you got to do. It just didn't work. And I agree. There was also the people who aren't here who are the people who are going to oppose anything like this. And we know they exist. But, you know.
But I guess to Tim's point, I just want to say, I think it's excellent that Hudson Housing Authority is at the table, putting proposals together. I know at Galvin Foundation, we're committed to taking action. We're building units right now, and we're going to continue building more affordable units. So I thank Malachi for his comments, and I look forward to hearing everyone's ideas and getting together to put concrete plans on the table. Because, yeah, we're past the point of just talking here. We need to take action.
right, and listen, there is a crisis here in Hudson, and we all know that. And someone needed to take action, and we didn't. Regardless if if sectors of the population believe it wasn't done in the proper way, but if anything, it created and it started a dialogue. And hopefully, the next development will incorporate, the transparency everyone is looking for. And, I respect Tom, and he was part of that process, and, and I think there was a lot we learned from that process.
Right, and what's on the table now, I think
Yeah.
addresses all the
Absolutely.
problems of the first version.
Listen, the city, regardless of who moves a project forward, it has to be in partnership with the city. They have to be at the table as well, right? They have to support it, and they have to be at the table as well. Absolutely.
Close that on the last thought. From what I gained here is that we really need to see progress. So I know that our team is more than willing to get to the table and really create a plan that's transparent and that's conscious of everybody's thoughts, so we can really get things moving. I'm gonna, sake of time, turn things over to Peter to give any closing that you want to give, this being the 6th and final. He's shaking his head no, so I'm going to wrap this up and thank everybody for coming. I want to say that I'll be available if people want to reach out to me to talk about more of these issues further. Malachi, who's on our team, is also available. Michael Comedis, who's a supervisor in here, Tom as well, who's the Common Council president. So, hold all of us accountable, for this and reach out to us. Thank you.